The night flight from Dubai to New York was full. Most of the passengers looked tired, dragging their carry-ons, eyes already heavy with sleep. The business class cabin had a quiet, calm energy. Soft lights glowed from overhead, and the sound of suitcase wheels and polite greetings filled the air. Among the passengers was a black woman in her early 30s. She wore a simple black travel set, nothing fancy but clean and sharp. A thin silver bracelet rested on her wrist, and a small leather bag was all she carried. Her name was Danielle, and to most people she looked like just another business traveler returning home. She showed her passport, smiled politely, and found her seat near the window. But Danielle wasn't just another passenger. She was on duty. Not for a regular job, but for the United States government. Danielle was a trained CIA field agent, quietly working an active case while sitting among regular passengers. Her mission was simple but risky. She was tracking someone on board this very flight. She had no backup, no weapons, and couldn't blow her cover. And she knew one thing clearly. If she failed, that person might walk free. While Danielle was calm, someone else in the cabin wasn't. A flight attendant named Marta had been with the airline for over 15 years. She was confident, strict, and known among staff for not taking nonsense. Some respected her. Others avoided her. Marta noticed Danielle the moment she walked into the cabin. Not because of anything Danielle did wrong, she simply looked too calm. She's alone, doesn't talk much. No laptop, no book. No drink request? Marta thought to herself. She's hiding something. Marta had a bad habit. She believed she could spot trouble just by looking at someone, and too often her eyes fell on people who didn't look like her. That night they fell hard on Danielle. Marta passed by Danielle's seat again and again, sometimes asking if she needed anything, sometimes just pretending to adjust the overhead bins. Danielle gave short, polite replies, but she could feel the tension. She was trained for it. This wasn't her first time being watched by someone while working undercover, but this time was different. Danielle wasn't just being watched by her target, she was being watched by someone with power inside the plane. A flight attendant who didn't know she was dealing with a federal agent on assignment. About 2 hours into the flight, Marta returned to Danielle's seat with a tight smile. "Excuse me," she said. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Danielle blinked, surprised. "Of course," she replied, keeping her voice calm. She reached into the seat pocket and handed over the folded boarding pass. Marta stared at it, then glanced at Danielle. "We just had a seating issue. Wanted to double-check." Danielle nodded, saying nothing, but she knew what this really was. Marta didn't believe she belonged in business class. After Marta walked away, Danielle opened her travel pouch and tapped her bracelet twice in a small, discreet movement. It wasn't a normal bracelet. It was a secure device connected to her agency. The message she sent was silent and simple. Target on board. Surveillance in progress. Minor interference from crew. The interference wasn't life-threatening. Not yet, but it was annoying, and it was growing. A few seats behind Danielle, a man wearing glasses and a gray hoodie sat quietly reading from a tablet. He didn't look dangerous, but the name on his passport was fake, and his real job involved selling sensitive American tech secrets to buyers in Eastern Europe. Danielle had been following him for weeks. This was the moment they'd been preparing for, him, the moment where he would meet someone in New York and hand off a stolen biometric chip. Danielle didn't need distractions, but Marta wasn't done. She came back again, this time with another flight attendant, whispering as they walked past Danielle. They didn't say anything at first, just walked slowly past her row, looking in her direction. Danielle pretended not to notice. She leaned back, kept her breathing steady, and watched the man in the gray hoodie out of the corner of her eye. Marta circled back, this time carrying a small tablet. "We're updating our seat manifest," she said to Danielle. "Can you confirm your full name and destination?" Danielle looked up, smiled tightly, and repeated her name and final destination. Her voice didn't shake, but inside she was frustrated. She couldn't pull rank. Couldn't flash a badge, not yet. Her mission required complete cover, and any outburst could put her operation at risk. Marta scribbled something, then moved on. 30 minutes later, a passenger in economy walked up and whispered something to Marta. Danielle noticed Marta nodding and glancing her way again. She was building a case on a false one. Danielle. leaned forward slightly and adjusted her earpiece, which looked like a regular wireless earbud. On a low frequency, she sent a quick audio note to her handler. Mild crew interference. Possible profiling. Flight attendant has now made 3 unnecessary stops. Mission still active. No threat to agent safety. Monitoring target. On the outside, she looked relaxed. But her instincts were sharp. She knew what was happening. She wasn't just being watched. She was being targeted, and Marta was already speaking to the pilot. "Sir," Marta said quietly, "I don't want to cause a scene, but there's a woman in 4A whose behavior doesn't match her documents. She's acting strange. No engagement, avoids conversation, and carries no visible business tools. I recommend alerting customs upon landing." The captain raised an eyebrow. "You think she's a security threat?" "Something's off," Marta insisted. "Could be stolen identity. Could be more. Better to be safe." The captain, not wanting to take chances, nodded. "I'll notify the ground crew." Danielle didn't hear the conversation, but she could feel the shift. One of the junior flight attendants, a young woman just a few months into her job, passed by Danielle and gave her a brief look. It wasn't judgment. It was worry. Danielle had seen that look before, from people who knew something wasn't right, but didn't know how to help. She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. In her mind, she went over the next steps. What if they tried to detain her? What if the target noticed the attention? What if the mission fell apart? Her agency trained her for these situations. But no training prepared her for this exact kind of challenge, being treated like a threat while stopping one. Across the aisle, the man in the hoodie stood up and walked toward the restroom. Danielle's eyes followed him without turning her head. He paused briefly near the galley, looked at Marta, and then walked on. That was the first sign something was off. He knew something was happening too. Danielle tapped her bracelet again. A silent message was sent. Suspect changing behavior. Flight crew creating disruption. Mission status, red, request remote assistance. At that moment, things had shifted. The mission was no longer just about stopping the man in the hoodie. It was now about staying on the plane long enough to do it, without getting taken down by her own country's system. And the worst part? Marta still thought she was the hero of the story. The flight was more than halfway through when things started to get tense. Danielle sat quietly, pretending to read the in-flight magazine, but her mind was sharp, focused on the mission. The man in the gray hoodie was still nearby, and Marta, the flight attendant, was getting more persistent. Marta's eyes followed Danielle everywhere. Every small movement Danielle made seemed to annoy her more. When Danielle asked for a glass of water, Marta took a long time to bring it, and her tone was colder than usual. It was clear she didn't trust Danielle and wanted to make her feel uncomfortable. Danielle stayed calm. Years of training helped her hide frustration and keep a neutral face. She knew that losing control could blow her cover, and the mission would fail, so she waited, observing quietly. Marta wasn't working alone anymore. A few of the other flight attendants began to watch Danielle too. It was like a quiet team had formed around her, all suspicious and whispering behind their hands. This made Danielle's situation worse. It wasn't just Marta now. The whole crew seemed to think something was wrong. At one point, Marta came back with another flight attendant and stood near Danielle's seat. They asked to see her boarding pass again. Danielle handed it over without complaint. She was polite but didn't say much. The flight attendants exchanged looks as if trying to decide what to do next. One flight attendant whispered to Marta, "She's acting strange, not like the other passengers." Marta nodded, a slight smile on her lips. "I told you something's off." Danielle realized Marta was building a story, a reason to accuse her of something. The more the flight attendants watched, the easier it would be to create a problem. But Danielle wasn't just sitting quietly for nothing. She was still watching the man in the gray hoodie. He was calm but nervous, occasionally glancing around like he was afraid of being watched. Danielle knew he was dangerous. If he managed to sell those stolen chips, it could cause a lot of harm. Her mind raced as she thought about how to stop him. But first, she had to get through this. A few hours into the flight, Marta's behavior became harder to ignore. She started following Danielle everywhere, offering no real help, just watching. When Danielle went to the restroom, Marta waited outside. When Danielle returned, Marta asked where she had been and what she was doing. Danielle answered politely but kept her answers short. She didn't want to reveal anything. She simply said she was taking care of personal matters. Inside, she was frustrated. How could someone be so blind? She was working to protect people, and here she was being treated like a criminal. It was hard, but Danielle reminded herself why she was there. Her mission was more important than Marta's ignorance. Danielle's wrist buzzed softly. It was a message from her handler, sent through a secret communication channel embedded in her bracelet. Situation escalating. Stay calm, we are monitoring. The message was a relief. Someone else knew what was happening and was ready to help if needed. But it also meant things were getting serious. Danielle leaned back and took a deep breath. She reminded herself of the training she had received. Always stay professional, never lose your cool, and don't engage in arguments. The less Marta had to say about her, the better. She noticed a few passengers looking at her with curiosity, some with sympathy. The young flight attendant, who looked uncomfortable about Marta's behavior, passed by again and gave her a quick, encouraging smile. Danielle appreciated that small kindness. As the plane moved closer to New York, the tension in the cabin grew. Marta was now openly discussing Danielle with the pilot, her voice low but firm. "She's acting suspicious, Captain," Marta said. "I think we need to involve security as soon as we land." The captain frowned but nodded. "We will. Safety is our priority." Danielle overheard this and felt her heart beat faster. She wasn't prepared to be stopped or questioned on arrival. Not until she finished her job. She sent another quick message through her bracelet. "Flight crew planning to detain. Request backup at JFK," her handler replied almost immediately. "Understood. Backup team en route. Keep low." Danielle nodded to herself. The mission was still on, but now she was in a dangerous spot. She had to stay calm and avoid provoking Marta or the crew. Suddenly, Marta approached Danielle's seat again, this time with a sharper tone. "Ma'am, I need you to open your bag for inspection." Danielle's eyes widened for just a moment. Opening her bag in front of Marta meant risking her mission. There were documents and equipment inside she couldn't let anyone see, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable with that." Marta's smile disappeared. "It's a security measure. You don't have a choice." Danielle considered her options. Arguing would only escalate things. She slowly unzipped her bag just enough to show the inside without revealing too much. Marta leaned in, scanning the contents. "Nothing suspicious here," she said, but her eyes narrowed. "Still, you're making people uncomfortable." Danielle closed the bag carefully. "I'm sorry if I caused any trouble. I'm just trying to get some rest before my meeting." Marta shook her head and walked away, but Danielle could feel the tension like a heavy weight on her chest. The hours passed slowly. Marta's actions became more aggressive, ignoring Danielle's requests politely, asking her questions about her identity, and subtly encouraging other flight attendants to keep an eye on her. Danielle realized Marta was trying to trap her, to force a mistake. If she stayed quiet, Marta would lose interest. If she reacted, Marta might create a scene, so Danielle stayed quiet. Throughout it all, Danielle kept watching the man in the hoodie. At one point, he moved towards the back of the plane and had a quick, secretive conversation with someone in the economy class. Danielle couldn't hear what was said, but she recognized the tension. That was the moment she knew things were about to change. The man was preparing to make his move. She tapped her bracelet again and sent a coded message to her team. Suspect preparing transfer. Mission critical. Her handler's response came in seconds. Hold position. Backup arriving. Danielle leaned back and tried to look relaxed, but inside she was ready to act. Meanwhile, Marta's attitude had shifted. She was no longer just suspicious, she was hostile. When Danielle tried to stand up to stretch, Marta quickly appeared and told her to sit back down. "You're making too much noise," Marta said sharply. "Other passengers are complaining." Danielle forced a polite smile and sat down. "I'm sorry. I just needed to stretch." Marta didn't reply but stayed close by, her eyes cold. Danielle felt trapped but refused to give up. 8341. She thought about the passengers around her. Some were watching quietly. Some were trying to avoid the conflict, and a few were clearly uncomfortable with how Marta was treating her. Danielle wanted to believe that some of them understood, even if they didn't know the full story. As the plane began its final descent toward New York, the flight crew prepared for landing, and Marta prepared to make her move. Danielle knew she had to be ready. Her mission wasn't over. The man in the hoodie was still there, still dangerous. And Marta's suspicion, while unfair, was becoming a bigger problem. Danielle closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. She reminded herself, stay calm, stay focused, and finish the job. The night was far from over. The plane was now in the final hours of the flight. The quiet hum of the engines was almost constant, mixing with the soft rustle of passengers shifting in their seats and the occasional call from the flight attendants. Danielle was still in her seat, her eyes alert but calm. She was tired, yes, but she couldn't afford to relax, not now. Marta had not backed down. In fact, her behavior had become more intense. She watched Danielle closely, no longer just suspicious but increasingly aggressive in subtle ways. She would step by and offer help in a tone that felt more like a challenge than service. Danielle had learned to expect this kind of pressure, but it was different this time. It was not just about suspicion. Marta was trying to unsettle her, hoping to get a reaction. If Danielle slipped up, it could be used against her. The other flight attendants had started to follow Marta's lead. Quiet glances were exchanged. Hushed whispers floated through the aisles, and Danielle could feel eyes on her from all sides. The cabin felt smaller, the air thicker, yet Danielle remained steady. Her focus was on the man in the gray hoodie who was still seated a few rows behind her, mostly keeping to himself. She knew he was dangerous. The mission was clear. Stop him from handing over stolen technology that could cause serious damage if it fell into the wrong hands. Suddenly, Marta approached with a tablet in her hand, blocking Danielle's path when she tried to get up to use the restroom. "Excuse me," Marta said firmly. "You can't leave your seat right now." Danielle looked up, surprised but composed. "I really need to use the restroom." Marta's expression hardened. "No, we're asking you to stay seated." "Security concerns." Danielle swallowed, realizing Marta was using her authority to restrict her movements. She nodded slowly, not wanting to cause a scene, but inside her mind raced. This was no longer just about suspicion. It was a trap. As Marta turned to walk away, Danielle's bracelet buzzed lightly. A message appeared on her hidden screen. "Backup team delayed. Stay calm, maintain cover." Danielle took a deep breath. She could not afford to lose control. Not yet. A few moments later, a young flight attendant passed by and gave Danielle a small, almost invisible nod. It was the same young woman who had shown some kindness earlier. Danielle gave a faint smile in return. It was a small comfort in a tense situation. Then Marta came back, now with another flight attendant. They leaned close and whispered between themselves, glancing at Danielle. The younger attendant looked unsure, but Marta was confident. "Ma'am," Marta said, "we need to check your identification again, and we're going to inspect your bag fully this time." Danielle's heart skipped a beat. Opening her bag completely could expose her equipment and jeopardize the mission. "I don't feel comfortable with that," Danielle said quietly but firmly. "I've shown my ID and boarding pass several times already." Marta's eyes narrowed. "This is a security check. You must comply." Danielle knew she couldn't refuse outright. She slowly opened her bag, carefully covering sensitive items. Marta sifted through the contents, looking for anything she could use against her. Finding nothing suspicious, Marta grumbled but said, "Fine, but you're making people uncomfortable. We've had complaints." Danielle forced a smile. "I'm sorry if I caused any trouble." As Marta walked away, Danielle leaned back and closed her eyes briefly. The situation was becoming more difficult by the minute. Across the aisle, the man in the hoodie was moving again. He looked tense and was speaking quietly with someone in economy class. Danielle watched closely. It was clear he was planning the handoff. Her bracelet buzzed again. Suspect preparing to move. Prepare for possible confrontation on ground. Danielle's mind raced. The mission was nearing its critical moment. But she was trapped in a web of suspicion from the flight crew. She needed to stay calm and wait for backup. Suddenly, Marta returned with a small group of crew members. Their whispers grew louder, and Danielle could feel the eyes of the entire cabin on her. A loud voice broke the silence. "Excuse me, ma'am. We've had reports of suspicious behavior. For everyone's safety, you need to cooperate." Danielle looked around. Passengers were watching now, some curious, others uneasy. She stood slowly and faced Marta and the others. "I'm not a threat. I'm just trying to get to New York," Marta smirked. "That's what they all say." Danielle's phone buzzed again. A new message popped up. "Prepare for arrival. Backup team waiting. Stay calm." The plane began its descent, the familiar bumps and shakes signaling they were close to landing. Danielle took a deep breath and adjusted her jacket. Her eyes locked on Marta. She could see the flight attendant's smug expression as if victory was already hers. But Danielle knew better. The mission wasn't over, and this was far from the end. As the plane landed and taxied to the gate, Marta turned to the captain and said firmly, "I want her detained when we land." The captain nodded but said quietly, "We'll follow protocol." Danielle's heart pounded. But she kept her composure. The moment the plane came to a stop, security personnel began boarding, led by a group of plainclothes agents. They approached Danielle calmly but with authority. Marta pointed at Danielle. "She's the one." One of the agents stepped forward and showed a badge. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you're with the CIA, right?" Danielle nodded. Marta's eyes widened in shock. The agent smiled. "We've been watching. Your cover was almost blown, but the mission is a success." Danielle felt a wave of relief. The man in the hoodie was escorted off the plane in handcuffs, and the stolen technology was recovered. Marta was quietly taken aside for questioning. As Danielle walked through the airport with the agents, she felt the weight of the night lift slightly. She had faced suspicion, hostility, and danger, all while doing her job. She looked back once, thinking about the passengers who had watched silently, the young flight attendant who showed kindness, and the flight crew who misunderstood her. She knew the world wasn't always fair, but sometimes it was the quiet work behind the scenes that kept it safe. After the plane landed, the cabin was filled with a tense silence. Passengers waited quietly, some confused, others whispering nervously. The moment the wheels touched down, everything changed. Security agents moved quickly but carefully, stepping into the aisle and making their way toward Danielle. Her heart was steady, but her mind was alert. Danielle stood up calmly, gathering her belongings. The flight attendants watched her with mixed emotions, some with suspicion, some with surprise. Marta was nowhere to be seen at that moment, but Danielle knew the flight attendant's role wasn't over yet. The agents, dressed in plain clothes but clearly in charge, approached Danielle politely. One of them showed his badge and spoke gently. "Ma'am, we know who you are. You're with the CIA." Danielle nodded, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. Finally, someone who understood. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm here on an active mission." The agents moved quickly to escort her off the plane. Behind her, the man in the gray hoodie was already in handcuffs, surrounded by security personnel. The stolen technology was recovered, safe and out of reach. Passengers watched the scene unfold, some clapping quietly, others whispering questions. For most, it was a surprising end to a long flight. For Danielle, it was the end of a difficult chapter. As they walked through the airport, Danielle was briefed on what had happened during the flight. Her handler explained that Marta, the flight attendant who had been suspicious of her, had spoken to the captain and crew, causing a lot of confusion and nearly compromising the mission. "Why would she do that?" Danielle asked quietly. Her handler shrugged. "It happens. Sometimes people don't understand what they're dealing with. Sometimes it's fear or misunderstanding, but we'll handle it." Danielle thought about Marta. She had been so certain Danielle was up to no good, yet she had no idea Danielle was working to protect the country. It was a strange feeling, to be judged so harshly, only to be saved by the very people who doubted her. Later, Danielle was taken to a secure location for debriefing. The room was small but comfortable, with soft lighting and a quiet hum of technology. Her colleagues waited patiently as she shared every detail of the flight, from Marta's suspicion to the movements of the man in the gray hoodie. The debriefing was thorough. Every moment was examined to learn what went right and what could be improved. Danielle was honest about the challenges she faced, including the tension with the flight crew and the difficulty of maintaining cover under pressure. Her supervisors listened carefully. They understood that missions like this were complex. There were no easy answers, only lessons to learn. After the debriefing, Danielle was allowed to rest. She found herself thinking about the passengers on that flight. Many had no idea what had happened behind the scenes. They had simply seen a woman being watched and questioned, not knowing she was the reason they were safe. Danielle wondered how many times ordinary people unknowingly crossed paths with heroes, people who worked quietly, without thanks or recognition, to keep the world safer. The next day, Danielle received a message from the young flight attendant who had shown kindness during the flight. It was a simple note. "I'm sorry for what happened. I hope you're okay." Danielle smiled. It was a small gesture but meant a lot. It reminded her that not everyone judged her the same way. Some saw the truth, even when it was hidden. As she prepared to return home, Danielle felt a deep sense of purpose. The mission was dangerous and difficult, but it was important. She was proud of the work she did, even when it was misunderstood. She knew the world was full of people like Marta, people who acted out of fear or misunderstanding. But she also knew there were those like the young flight attendant, people willing to show kindness and empathy. In the end, Danielle realized that the world was not black and white. It was full of complex stories like hers, stories of trust and suspicion, fear and courage, misunderstanding and hope. Her job was to navigate those stories, to protect the innocent and to do what was right, even when no one was watching. As Danielle walked out of the airport, the morning sun warmed her face. She took a deep breath and smiled. The mission was over, but her work was never done. After the mission was over and Danielle had finally left the airport, she felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. Her body was tired from the long flight and the stress of the situation, but her mind was still busy thinking about everything that had happened. It was hard to believe how quickly things had escalated, from sitting quietly on the plane to being surrounded by security and then finally to walking free with the mission completed. She knew this was not just a one-time event. Missions like these happened all the time, often without anyone outside her world ever knowing. People like Danielle worked in the shadows, quietly protecting others, even when faced with suspicion and misunderstanding. She thought about how many other agents might be in similar situations at that very moment, trying to keep calm and focused under pressure. As Danielle traveled back to her home base, she thought about the flight attendants, especially Marta. Marta had been so sure that Danielle was hiding something bad. She had watched her every move, asked questions, and tried to trap her. But Marta didn't know the truth. She didn't know that Danielle was risking her life for the safety of many people. It made Danielle wonder how fear could change a person. Marta's fear had made her act harshly, almost aggressively. Yet at the same time, she was just doing what she thought was right, protecting the passengers on the plane. It was a reminder that people often acted from their own worries and experiences, not knowing the full story. Danielle thought about the other flight attendants too. Some followed Marta's lead while others seemed uncertain, even sympathetic. And then there was the young flight attendant, the one who gave her a small encouraging nod during the flight and later sent her a kind message. That small gesture had meant a lot to Danielle. It reminded her that even in difficult moments, kindness could shine through. Back at her base, Danielle prepared for the official report and meetings with her supervisors. They needed to review every detail of the mission and figure out how to improve for the future. Danielle was honest about the challenges she faced and the pressure from the flight crew. She spoke about how important it was for agents like her to remain calm and professional, even when others didn't understand. Her supervisors listened carefully and praised her for keeping her cool under such difficult circumstances. They reminded her that being undercover was always challenging, and sometimes even the people who were supposed to help could make things harder. But they assured her that the backup team had done a great job, and the stolen technology was safely recovered. As the days passed, Danielle noticed something surprising. A few news articles appeared about the man in the gray hoodie, describing how he had been arrested at the airport for trying to smuggle important stolen technology. The reports were brief, but positive, thanking law enforcement for their quick action. No one mentioned Danielle or the undercover operation, just a simple story about a security threat stopped. Danielle didn't expect thanks or recognition. That was never why she did this work. But she did feel proud, knowing she had made a difference. One afternoon, as she was reviewing mission notes, she received a phone call from the young flight attendant who had reached out earlier. Their conversation was simple, but meaningful. The flight attendant thanked Danielle again and said she had learned a lot from the experience. "You were so calm even when things got tough," the flight attendant said. "I'm sorry I didn't understand at first." Danielle smiled and told her it was okay. Not everyone knows what's really going on. What matters is that you showed kindness when it counted. The conversation lifted Danielle's spirits. It reminded her that even small moments of understanding could have a big impact. In the weeks that followed, Danielle returned to her regular life, blending back into the world outside of secret missions. She met with colleagues, trained new agents, and prepared for future assignments. But she never forgot that flight, the tension, the suspicion, and the quiet courage of those who watched and waited. Sometimes Danielle thought about the passengers on that plane. What did they think when they saw a woman being watched and questioned? Did they feel safe or were they worried? She hoped that if nothing else, they would understand that sometimes people do difficult jobs to protect them, even if it's hard to see. Danielle's work was far from over. There would always be new missions, new dangers, and new challenges. But she was ready. She had learned that patience, calm, and kindness could be just as powerful as any tool or weapon. She knew that trust was fragile and that fear could cloud judgment. But she also knew that courage came in many forms, not just in action, but in standing strong when others doubted you. One day, while walking through the city, Danielle paused and looked up at the sky. The memory of that flight came back, how the tension had filled the air, how the small acts of kindness had stood out, and how, in the end, the mission had succeeded because she never gave up. Her heart was full of quiet pride. She was part of something bigger than herself, a hidden world that worked tirelessly to keep people safe, and she was ready for whatever came next.